Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Curious About Our Planet Festival from Glasgow Science Centre. And it is the first session of this festival today for Save Our Scottish Seas. Today, we're going to be speaking with Kirsty Crawford, the Volunteer and Community Engagement Manager from Marine Conservation Society. After we hear from Kirsty, we're going to open up to a live Q&A session. So when you're watching Kirsty's presentation, make sure that you make note of any questions that you might ask, and we will try and get to as many of them as possible in that session there. But without any further ado, I will pass over to Kirsty to tell us more about the Marine Conservation Society and our own Scottish oceans.
Hi everyone, my name's Kirsty and I work for the UK's largest and leading marine charity. So we are the Marine Conservation Society, and I'll be talking to you today about ways that we can all help to protect our oceans. We're going to cover who we are and what we do, and specifically some of the species and wildlife that we have here in Scotland. We'll talk a little bit about some of the problems that we face, what the solutions are, ways that we can all get involved, and we'll finish that off with a chance to ask questions. So this is our mission. So really our goal is to support ocean health, supported by people and always with science on our side. So everything that we do has to be supported by the science, and that's how we're able to campaign for change so effectively. And we'll find out more about this as we go along. So what is so special about Scotland and so special about our oceans? Well, this photo kind of sums it up. So if I asked you to think of somewhere that has spectacular and interesting, exciting marine habitats, you probably think somewhere overseas, but this is just taken across from the Isle of Arran right here in Scotland. It's a beautiful underwater photo. And some of the reasons that this country is so important for ocean health right here. So we have 10% of all of Europe's coastline. We've got 61% of UK waters, so more than half of the oceans that we have to protect in the waters in the UK are right here in Scotland. We also have about 800 islands. So we say about because it's debated when it's just a big rock and when it's actually an island. But either way, there's lots that we have here, lots to see, lots to explore, and lots to protect. So some of the wildlife species that we have, of course, the puffin, special to Scotland, really charismatic. Don't think I've met anyone that doesn't like a puffin. But the story here is that they are vulnerable to global extinction. So they're on the red list. The reasons that they are affected is mainly due to climate change and overfishing. So some of their favourite food, things like sand eels, are just not available and around for them to eat as much. In summer, Scotland is also home to this. This is the leatherback turtle. This is the largest species in the world, and it calls Scotland its home every summer. You might see a trend starting to appear. It's also vulnerable to global extinction, and the reasons for this are mainly due to plastic pollution. So the leatherback turtle's favourite food is the jellyfish. And if we think about some of the plastic bags that we have floating in our oceans, they can look quite similar. So unfortunately, a lot of the time, plastic ends up being ingested and ends up in the turtle's stomach. Finally, we have a shark species. I'll give you a couple of seconds to work out if you know what this one is. It's a mysterious, charismatic creature, and it calls Scotland its home. So it's a basking shark. We've actually managed to designate some protected areas around Scotland. So close to the small isles off the west coast of Scotland, things like Rum and Canna and Egg, if you've ever heard of them, or if you've been lucky enough to go there, the marine habitat around that area is now protected for basking sharks. There's a lot that we don't know. Vulnerable status again. So these species too, vulnerable to global extinction. And this is hugely due to being overfished many decades ago. So they're a massive animal and they give birth to only one shark. So it takes a long, long time for the population to recover. So as a charity, our work is split into 3 areas and we're campaigning for protection in all 3. So number 1 is a better protected ocean. So this is about campaigning in the next 10 years to have 30% of our oceans to be fully protected so that nature can recover. Number 2 is a cleaner ocean. So this is all about seeing a downward spiral in the number or the amount of plastic pollution that ends up in our oceans, again, in the next 10 years. So we want to do this through campaigns to do with things like single-use plastic. Finally, we want to see a healthier ocean. So again, by 2030, we want to see our fish stocks at sustainable levels and to be nice and healthily fished. And we're also going to help consumers make sustainable choices when they buy seafood and fish from the supermarkets and in restaurants. So a quick slide here just to show some of the work that I do at the Marine Conservation Society. I support people to collect wildlife data on beaches. I talk a lot at events and give presentations, and sometimes even on the television, to tell people all about the work that we do. I work with children and adults to support colleagues at education sessions, and we have a big roadshow coming this year to travel the length and breadth of the country to increase something called ocean literacy. So that's people's knowledge about the ocean and what they can do to protect it. And you'll often find me on the beach leading things like beach cleans and citizen science surveys. So there's lots to get involved in. Just a word and some graphics here to show you that our Sea Champion network of volunteers here in Scotland contributes massively to the work that we do. Anyone can sign up to be a Sea Champion. There's lots for you to get involved in, and the work that we do wouldn't be possible without you. So if you want more information to work more closely with me here in Scotland, then you can take a note of my email address at the end. And just a note for something for the future, if you're onwards to university or that's something that you think might be in the future, we work closely with a lot of unis, marine societies. So this one's with St Andrews Uni, but we also have some in Edinburgh and Aberdeen, Glasgow. So working closely with the students there to continue work to protect the marine environment. Now to some problems and solutions. So this photo shows all the litter that we found in a 100-metre stretch of beach, and it's mainly plastic. So the project that I'd like to talk about here is called Beach Watch, and it might look something a bit like this. So this is where people from all around the UK get together to clean our beaches, but most importantly to record what they find. So that's why there's a clipboard there in the bottom photo in the middle. So they remove rubbish from our beaches and our coastlines. And there is an event that I'd like to talk to you about. So you can do Beach Watch at any time of the year. I also have the Great British Beach Clean, which is just gone, but you can look out for it next year. It's in the third weekend or the third week of September. And this is a big citizen science project where volunteers all around the UK get together at the same time to clean our beaches and do that important litter survey to collect data for us throughout the year. So remember, we're science focused. Without this data, we're not able to effectively campaign. Cool thing is it's a real global movement. So right at the same time that we're over here, maybe in Edinburgh, maybe on Troon Beach doing our litter pick and our coastal clear up, we're also contributing to a whole world initiative. So the International Coastal Cleanup event sees people all over the world doing this at the same time. And I think that's pretty cool. So this is our main evidence base. If you hear a news headline or you hear statistics on the news talking about litter, this is where it came from. It's people just like you and me getting it and cleaning our beaches. So how do you do it and what does it look like? We want you to walk 100 metres or 100 paces in length, and that's your survey area. And you go from something called the strand line, which is where most of the seaweed washes up on the beach, right up to the back of the beach. And you want to pick up every piece of litter that you find on the way and create a little tally system on your survey sheet that looks just like this. So you might think there's a lot of categories going on there. Hundreds of thousands of people do this every year. It's really not complicated at all. And you get your eye in for the most common categories that we have. So we have a tally system. Every time you find something, you put a little check in the box and you count up your total at the end and submit your form. So all of this data that's here. So this is our report that we produce every year. This is from last year, which was a little bit different, of course, due to COVID. So it was much more smaller family cleans on beaches instead of those big sort of festival style events that we almost used to do. But we'll hopefully get back to that. The number one item that was found was this, is plastic and polystyrene pieces. So this is the average number that was found per 100 metres. This is probably the most important slide that I can show you. If you remember one thing from this talk, please remember this. Plastic never disappears. So it's almost like the language that we're using is wrong. Plastic doesn't break down, it doesn't biodegrade and then disappear. It breaks up over time into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics. So these aren't toxic when they enter the water. So something like a rigid piece of plastic, like a plastic bottle, enters the water. It's not toxic, but over time, roughly over 1,000 years, it'll break down into thousands of tiny little pieces, which will become toxic as they are faced with things like UV rays and wave action. And so these can end up being ingested by other species and even by us into our food chain. So not only are we potentially eating plastic, but we're ingesting those toxins. So I wanted to talk to you about a specific type of microplastic. And I really wanted you to be able to see this because it's very tiny. So this is under the microscope, and this is something called microfibers. What is a microfiber? Well, if you take a second to try and find a label on your clothing, something that you're wearing, and you have a look at it, see what it's made of. So luckily I've got 100% cotton here. If you have substances like polyester, nylon, acrylic, these are kind of plastic-based materials. And what happens is when we wash those plastic-based clothing items in our washing machines, the motion and the abrasion causes these to shed, gets pushed out with the wastewater and ends up in our sea. So 35% of all microplastics are actually these microfibers, these plastic-based clothing materials that come from the clothes that we wear. And they're in our food chain. So this, again, under the microscope is an oyster, which through filter feeding has ingested those microfibers in the seawater and is now holding them. So they will inevitably end up in our human food chain as well. Something that we want you to do that's really simple is to take this e-action. We want you to sign our petition that calls for filters to be legally written into government to fit in all washing machines in 2 years' time, that can hopefully stop that flow of all these fibres ending up into the sea. So please help us and join the Stop Ocean Threads campaign. All right, now to two of the top 5 that were found on our Scottish beaches. This is where it gets a little bit icky. This is something that we call sewage-related debris. So wet wipes and cotton bud sticks. Now, the reason they're called sewage-related debris is these are things that we can accidentally, or sometimes on purpose, flush down the toilet. And in one way or another, they end up on our beaches. So they might miss the filter system, or if it rains heavily, which is not hard to imagine, it does lots of the year in Scotland, and the sewer systems get kind of choked to capacity, they can release an overflow, which will push everything in there out to sea. So here on 100 metres again of beach, were all the cotton bud sticks found and all the wet wipes. So in the plastic bags, every bag but the first one, the colourful one, contains wet wipes and only wet wipes. So we found well over 1,000 in just a 100 metre stretch of beach clean. So everything that you can see here is made of plastic. Everything that you can see here usually ends up flushed down the toilet and usually ends up out to sea. So the message here is please don't flush them. There have been successes along the way. It's not all doom and gloom. And thanks to campaigns like the Stop the Plastic Tide campaign, we've seen lots of small wins across the way. So the 5p plastic bag charge that you might remember, plastic bags were one of the things that washed up on our beaches more than any other. And now with the introduction of this tax, we've seen a 55% reduction in the amount of plastic bags on our beaches. As you know, we've banned plastic microbeads from things like cosmetic products, and Scotland led the way to ban the sale of those plastic cotton bud sticks. Now, already we've seen a reduction in these. A small one was also to do with wet wipes, was to include the proper labelling. So the fine to flush tick means that the item is made from a biodegradable material. So that's what we're after, something that does break down over time and disappears and doesn't just break up. Next year, we should see a deposit return scheme in Scotland. So this is where you can return any kind of drinks container for a small amount of money, where it will go into a recycling scheme. Now, just quickly, we encourage individuals to think about their own plastic consumption, and we don't have a problem with all plastics. Sometimes that's the right material to use. The problem comes when we talk about single-use plastic, so something that is literally being created to fulfill its purpose, maybe for a few minutes, like a straw, and then just gets binned. So just have a think now about your own habits and see if there's any way you could make a couple of small changes. Could it be using a reusable shopping bag, grabbing yourself a water bottle, and here's 2 items as well. Be using jam jars and all different types of glass containers instead of plastic, and maybe grabbing some metal cutlery along the way instead of the plastic on offer. So just something for you to think about as a kind of private challenge. We also need to not target individual items like the wet wipes and the straws along the way, but really have a kind of full overhaul and work towards a circular economy. So let me try and explain what that means. So we have a linear economy, which is where items are kind of produced with a single use purpose. And once they've reached the end of their life or they've fulfilled that purpose, they end up in the bin and into landfill. Slightly better than that is a recycling economy. So where products are made and then they can be recycled. So a good material is something like glass. That's perfect. That can be recycled potentially an infinite number of times, be broken down and made into something new. If we think about the plastics that we think of as being able to be recycled, this is good, but plastic is downgraded every time it's recycled. So it loses its kind of structural integrity, and it can only be recycled 10 times is probably the absolute maximum. So really what we're doing is just delaying the process before it ultimately ends up back in landfill. So the goal in the end is to have a circular economy. This is where before we even create products, we're thinking about their shelf life and we're thinking about their end of life. We're thinking about ways in the world that we can reuse and repurpose more items so that they are reused infinitely and they never end up reaching the bin. Hopefully that's something that we want to be working towards in Scotland and in the UK. And what we want to avoid contributing to is this. I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So it's a swirling mass of all kinds of marine litter that's been collected somewhere between Hawaii and Japan. And to give you an estimate of the size of this big giant floating garbage patch is 3 times the size of the country of France. So if you've ever been to France, if you want to imagine France on a map for a minute, 3 times the size of a whole country is out there floating in our oceans. It's a collection of mainly plastic litter. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, because we recently discovered that about 70% of this actually floats to the bottom of the ocean. There is so much work to be done here. In the second strand of our work with ocean recovery, we do have some positive stories and positive things that we are doing to take action for our seas and for all the wonderful creatures like these that live in them. We have something called marine protected areas, and in the UK, more than 1/3 of our seas are protected in this way. So designated areas that are set out to be protected under a proper project plan to protect the things that live there. Now, unfortunately, 98% of all of these areas do have a practice called bottom trawling, which takes place in them. So this is a quite invasive and damaging fishing practice. And what we're asking is that under new powers in the Fishing Act, that the government ban bottom trawling completely in these areas. If you don't know what that is or what it looks like, it's up here on the screen. So it damages the seabeds, and it's an invasive method of fishing, which is used quite a lot to catch things like cod and haddock. So you can see those wheels that would trundle along the bottom of the seabed and chains, really damaging it. This can also release some of the carbon that is stored in the habitats there. And this huge kind of yawning opening of the net can also catch species that it was never intended to catch and kill them along the way. We've seen recovery though, where this has been implemented. So within 5 years of protection, in the UK, 3 areas had larger and more diverse populations of fish once we completely stopped this invasive practice. And we've seen that areas in the sea have biodiversity increased by 21%. So the variation and the quality and the health of all the animals that live there goes up when we stop this practice. So this is something that we want to see happen. So a word on climate change and the impacts on our sea. I'm sure you're probably aware of some of these, but we'll finish off by talking about them. So we have rising sea levels. The levels of our sea rise, which is impacted by the polar ice melt. So when ice melts on land and runs off and enters the water, the level of that invariably rises and can, of course, impact flooding in coastal towns and also have an impact on coastal erosion. We have a rise in temperature in our seas as well, which can wreak havoc on the species that have adapted to live at a certain temperature level. And they're impacted also by ocean acidification. So this happens when carbon dioxide enters our atmosphere and impacts our ocean, mainly through the burning of fossil fuels. And it starts to change the pH level. So the ocean is set at a level which is alkaline and which our species and creatures are happy with, but it's slowly becoming more acidic with the impacts of carbon dioxide. And this means that there's a lack of something called carbonate. So if you are any animal that has a shell, even if you're coral or different types of plankton, you need carbonate in the sea to form a healthy shell and to continue on your life cycle. So things like crabs and scallops and barnacles even, and oysters and mussels, everything's affected by this rise in ocean acidification. Hear climate change spoken about on the news. We often hear the powers and the great benefits of especially tropical forests and terrestrial habitats, so that means something that's on land. What we don't hear often is that actually 70% of the oxygen that we breathe comes from the ocean. So if the forests get referred to as the lungs of the world, then the ocean is certainly the beating heart. And the term that we use to describe all the properties that the ocean has in climate change reduction is blue carbon. So this basically means the carbon captured by the world's ocean and coastal ecosystems. If you think back to that damaging bottom trawling kind of fishing practice and you remember how it dredged through the seabeds, this is where the carbon is locked away and stored, and this is how different methods can release it. So we've got things like kelp forests that you can see here, huge belts of seaweed, a habitat called seagrass, lots of positive habitats that are amazing for locking in carbon, and that is what we need to protect. Now, we actually have a project that I can't go into too much detail, but it's right here in the north of Scotland, and it's a restoration project for native oysters. So oysters are being put back in their native habitat for the first time in over a century. And we think that these oyster reefs have the power to act as a long-term carbon store, and they can also help purify the water. So it's called the DEEP project, the Dornoch Environmental Enhancement Project. It's a great case study and something to read about if you are interested. I'll finish off with a couple more citizen science projects that you can get involved in. So we've got the big seaweed search. This is about getting people down to the beach to look at seaweed, funnily enough, just like this, to recognise a couple of common types. Seaweed is hugely important and also in the fight against climate change, and we want to see how it's been impacted. So not only by rising temperatures, but also from non-native seaweed species coming in. So we ask you to get down to the beach, grab your phone, take a couple of snaps, record your data on a sheet, and send it off to help scientists at the Natural History Museum in London. We also have the jellyfish survey. Again, we're evidence-based, so think about all those photos and all that data that we need to do our work properly. So anytime you're out and about and you spot a jellyfish, you can upload it on our website. We also have a marine turtle survey there as well. So anything that you're seeing on the beach, we would like to know about it. And finally, the third strand of our work is sustainable seafood. So this is where my colleagues are working towards something called the Good Fish Guide, which is now available in a smartphone app. And it's a way of working out how to make sustainable and sensible choices for your seafood. A couple of things you can do. Avoid the red rated fish on there. So if you do grab it and download it onto your phone, it's like a traffic light system. You want to be going more towards the green and amber rated fish. In Scotland, we tend to only eat about 5 different types of seafood and fish. So there's lots of variety to be had. Some maybe different species, different types that you might not have tried before. Try to incorporate them. Labeling, look for the blue ticks because you know it's come from a sustainable source and it's being farmed responsibly, and try to avoid those sort of damaging environmental impact methods like trawling. If you've never heard about this, we've got a long way to go when we make the choices about the food that ends up on our plate. And finally, I'll leave you with a summary of some things you can do if you've been inspired to take action and help our oceans. You can take part in beach cleans, so all year round you can take part in Beach Watch. If you head to our website, you'll find everything that you need, or you can wait until September and take part in a big group effort, or maybe in your school as well, to take part in Great British Beach Clean. In the Ocean Threads campaign, so remember that's the petition to do with microfibres and the filters in our washing machines. That would take 2 seconds and it would really help make a case for us. You could individually, again, as a group, take the plastic challenge and try and reduce your single-use plastic. Get down to the beach maybe and take part in some citizen science, just like the big seaweed search, and use the Good Fish Guide where you can when you're thinking about what you want to eat. If you want to go more in depth, we have a paper called the Ocean Recovery Plan that sets out everything that we plan to do and how an organisation like the Marine Conservation Society works in order to help protect our seas. So maybe if that's something that you're interested in as a career choice, or you just want to know more. Thanks so much for listening. My email address is here, and if you do have any questions, maybe if you wanted to be a sea champion or get us out for an education session, you can email. And also look out for us on social media. Our handles are there. I'll pass over to you now and see if you've got any questions.
Hello, so we are back, and I must say that I am well and truly inspired. We are so lucky to be greeted and joined by Kirsty Crawford, the Volunteer and Community Engagement Manager at Marine Conservation Society. How are you today, Kirsty?
Hi, Jess. Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much for joining us. You have absolutely inspired me. I want to get out into the beaches already and go for a bit of a beach clean. But we've got a number of different questions, both that are being sent in from the YouTube comments and ones that have been sent in prior to this discussion. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the YouTube comments and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. But I think we do have a first question for you, Kirsty, and that is, why is biodiversity in our seas so important?
Yeah, all right, great question to kick us off. So biodiversity really just means all life on Earth. And then when you think back to, if we even just take Scotland and those figures where we have, 10% of Europe's seas and 61% of water in the UK, we think about all the life that is sustained in there. We even think about food chains, so the smaller species being food for the larger species and keeping that whole cycle going around, which in turn do provide food for us. So it's no doubt that fishing is a sustainable practice for humans even to survive. Without or with falling numbers of life in our seas, it starts to impact on habitats as well. So the seaweed is needed to protect schools of just newly born fish, and the fish are then needed to feed the larger animals like the seals and some of the shark species. So when one component of that on the biodiversity chain starts to fall away, we start to see a breakdown in everything else. So it's almost like everything has its place and helps the world go round, and our seas are an equally important habitat for life on Earth.
Absolutely. I always like to think of it like a Jenga puzzle. So it's all like these building blocks that rely upon one another. And as soon as you pull out one of those Jenga blocks or a couple of others, it starts to weaken and eventually crumble. So I think it's exactly it, that we're all relying on one another, and particularly our biodiversity, both on land and in the ocean as well. I think we do have another question coming up. And when an animal is on the red vulnerable list, how close are they to extinction?
Okay, as you can imagine, that's probably quite hard to specifically pinpoint. So I think the red list is really interesting. If anyone is interested to go and look at it more, it's constantly reassessed, and it's got about 20%, I think, of all the life that we have on it. And basically, to work out how close something is to extinction, you need to work out how rare it is. So you're looking at how its numbers have declined, say, in the past 10 years. What area does it live in? Does it live in a really small area, and what's happening with that? Or is it able to spread out and adapt? So the vulnerable category sits between least concern, vulnerable to extinction, near threatened, and critically endangered. So I think I've probably got that the wrong way around. So near threatened, vulnerable, and then endangered. So it's right in the middle. If we take something like the puffin in 2012, it was of least concern. So it was doing absolutely fine. 3 years later, in 2015, it became vulnerable. So in those 3 years, we've seen a huge amount of overfishing, a huge amount of habitat loss, and it's now stayed that way. So from 2015 right up until the present day.
Wow.
So I can't even remember the original question. So yeah, it's hard to quantify, but that 3-year example, I suppose, shows you how quickly things can change. So it'll be up to scientists all over the world to produce papers and look at how, if we're still talking about the puffin, how that's doing. And if they start to see a decline, then it can be sort of what they call downlisted. It can go into a lower category. So it's hard to tell, but vulnerable certainly means we really need to act fast before we see a real problem start to emerge.
Absolutely. I think, as you said, it doesn't just take one paper. I think you said that it takes a number of different papers and scientists and monitoring surveys to make that decision, I think, rather than just having one person walk in and go, yep, that's definitely vulnerable. It sounds like there's a lot of science that underpins that
Absolutely.
status.
I mean, it's a whole team of people's whole entire job is to monitor certain species in progress and try and get this as accurate as we can, because this is like the number one tool that we have. So as conservationists, it's really about trying to stop the categories from shifting, and you ideally want to get everything to be what we call of least concern, which means everything's as it should be, but that's not the case, which is why the list exists in the first place, I suppose. But yeah, it's super interesting to take a look. Even if you think of like your favorite animal, you can type it in and see how it's doing.
I will confess that I quite often do that with animals. Sometimes I'll sit there and I'm like, I wonder how this animal's doing at the moment. I think it is a fantastic resource to get some information about your favorite animal, but also about what the habitat is like and how it's coping out in the wild as well. So I think that was a really great question in terms of the red list. I think we've got another question coming up. Oh, do you need special equipment to take part in a beach clean?
No, not at all. So if there's a couple of ways to go about it, and I hope people will jump on board with this. So if you're in Scotland, you can get us out for a clean. And we can provide you with all the materials, so things like litter pickers and gloves and all the clipboards, and we've got weighing scales, so we always want to know how much weight in terms of litter that we've picked up. So you can have us out with you and we'll give you all that, or we can put you in touch with the local council that will give you the key things that you need. They'll also come and they'll take your litter away at the end of the clean, or you basically just need a pair of gloves. Definitely, you don't want to be touching anything that might be sharp or be a bit nasty down there on the beach. And a bag to put it in is probably the absolute minimum. So a pair of gloves and a bag, and you can set off. But obviously we really like it if you can grab one of those sheets off the website that breaks everything down, and you can tick off, like, we found 5 lollipop sticks and 6 wet wipes, and that all over the country gets pushed into this database, which, as you saw, is how we make change. And we can tell the government, so we can say to the government, there's a really big problem, and they always come back and they'll say, prove it, show us, we need to see that demonstrated. So that is why that exists.
It's absolutely fantastic. I love that you don't need a lot to be able to take part as well. I think I suppose nowadays it can be quite difficult to get access to resources and feel like you've got the right tools with you to be able to do something. So knowing that you can just grab a pair of gloves, some nice strong gloves, gardening gloves, and maybe a bag and a citizen science sheet, a pencil, and you're off. I think it's as easy as that, isn't it? It's just pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and litter pickers, they do help, and councils have a whole host of them. So all the local councils in Scotland will be really happy if you give them a hand and you just contact them and ask for a couple. So it should be nice and easy to get involved.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. I think we've actually got a question from a YouTube comment. So Jenny Scottston has said, we've been learning about STEM careers recently. What skills do you think you need to do your STEM job?
That's a great question. Something I think about and I like to talk about often, because I do indeed work in STEM now, but I didn't start off working there. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that you don't have to be on one solid sort of scientific path and stick to it. But for where I am today and this job, you need to do a lot of communication. So whether that's doing something like this, talking to the public, or doing a lot of training courses and presentations, speaking about our work maybe on radio or TV, writing blog articles, writing magazine articles. So communication, which to me says English. And I really liked English at school, and I think it's like one of the most solid sort of like foundation subjects that will put you in good stead. I'm not necessarily saying that you need to be amazing at it, but I think just feeling comfortable with both written and verbal communication, especially in conservation, goes a long way. Because when you think about it, all the time we're trying to give people a lot of information and sort of push messages across, and you don't want to do that in a way that comes across as maybe overbearing or even bores people. And I hope you weren't bored today, but it's trying to use those communication skills. Yeah. And I think a little bit.
Oh, it looks like
afraid to ask for help and for advice. So in terms of volunteering. or not being afraid to send an email or chat through a door. And yeah, just ask for advice. Can you still see me?
It is. You were cutting out a little bit there, Kirsty, but that's okay. I think we got the general message that communication is such an incredible skill to have in a STEM career, or indeed any career. Being able to effectively communicate the message that you want to get across to a colleague, to your audience, to anyone that you want to interact with. It's incredibly important. So really developing that ability to effectively communicate with one another. It's such an important skill. And I don't think it's often spoken about. I think we always talk about sort of qualifications and study, and whereas something like being able to effectively communicate and collaborate with people, so really being able to work effectively with someone else, I think these are such important skills for a STEM career and STEM jobs.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd also say like a bit of a dose of curiosity as well always helps. Why is that happening? Why is that population declining? How does that thing work? How can I fix it? And just having an inquiring mind that's not afraid to ask questions. And definitely from my point of view, it's not, as you say, all about the qualifications and going down a certain route. It's about getting rich life experiences, speaking to lots of people, getting lots of points of view, and then making up your own mind. So don't let other people tell you what to do. That's my advice.
Absolutely. I think that was a fantastic response. I think we've got another question coming up. This is a really fantastic one in terms of if people are going out to the beach on their own, whether they're they're out on a holiday or just a day trip. But what do we do with all the plastic we find on the beach or in the ocean, and where does it go? So once people pick it up and maybe pop it in the water, in the bin, sorry, or even if it is in the water and they're not able to get it, I suppose, where does it go? If it's left in the ocean?
So every time the tide comes in, the strand line that we spoke about, which is like, next time you go to the beach, have a look. So all the seaweed will form in like one big kind of long line. So that's the strand line, and the tide pushes all the rubbish in twice a day. So
I know that exact spot because it's always when you sit on the sand and you're trying to walk down to the water, and it's that really sketchy bit where you're worried that you're going to hurt your feet as you walk down to the water. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So that's like the hot spot. So twice a day, all the rubbish that's in the ocean basically gets pushed in. So it can sometimes be a bit disheartening. If you've come and cleaned the beach, you know that there's more coming, but that's all part of it. So once it's washed up and you pick it up, you can pop it in any bin that you can see. That's the proper place for it. If you've organized the cleaning, and you've got like 5-6 bags, it was a really dirty beach, you can tell the council, they'll come and take it away. So it will then hopefully properly get categorized and disposed of. So anything that can be recycled get taken away to the proper recycling facility. Some of it will end up in landfill, which is a whole other story, but at least it's not in the sea where it really, really doesn't belong. And some of it will get converted into energy or be incinerated and just disposed of probably in the proper way. So you're really just helping to move that from the marine habitat where animals can come along and sort of eat it, where it could be sharp or damaging to beach users, and you're trying to move it to the proper place to get disposed of in a better way.
Absolutely. Or even as you said, when you were talking about that really big marine litter garbage patch, or as you said, was it 70% end up falling down, it falls to the bottom as well. So even if we can reduce a little bit of that from falling to the bottom of the ocean would be fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, the ultimate goal I think, reducing the use of like single-use plastics and finding other solutions. And I know we've been talking about this like as a society for a long time, but there are small wins and small changes, but that's going to help solve the problem more than anything. Is if we're not using it in the first place, then it's got nowhere to go.
Exactly. Particularly in ways that we know that we can make those small changes. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So one coming up is, what action is being taken to clean the giant garbage patch? Are there any particular countries taking responsibility?
That's a really good one. And it's hard, I suppose, once it gets into the water, because unless you can, and what we try to do a lot of the time is there'll be labelling on manufacturer, so we can hopefully trace it back to the point of where it was sold or produced or manufactured. So there's a particular problem, I will answer the question, but there's a particular problem where I was in Dumfries, so Dumfries and Galloway down on the south coast of Scotland, where the way that the waves and the tides come pushes everything from Ireland over onto our beaches. So I was there cleaning the beach 2 days ago, and there's a specific type of plastic bottle that's manufactured over in Ireland, and it always washes up. Hundreds of these bottles, just because of the way the sea moves, come over to Scotland, where we then clean them up and we then deal with the problem. We then found out that in Norway, some of our fish boxes, because of the way, again, the tide works, get them pushed over to Norway. So then Norway's trying to clear up Scotland's products while we're cleaning up Ireland's products. So but in the garbage patch, I know that, I think, and you can look at this in the news really recently, maybe 2 weeks ago, there was a huge effort to tie a net between two massive sort of ships. What's the proper word for them? The ones that take a lot of, like, cargo ships.
Cargo ship,
yeah. And basically push their way really slowly through the patch. But it's more overwhelming than you can ever imagine to try and get through. But once a year, at least, they do try and make a little inroads into it. So it's almost like fishing for that kind of litter and dragging through and then trying to take it away and dispose of it properly. No one's taking responsibility for it, as far as I know. And to be honest, I don't know a whole lot of information about the ins and outs of it. But I do know that it's on the radar, and at least once a year. You can imagine how long and logistically how complicated that would be to organise, to say, right, we've got 3 times the size of France on our hands, what we're going to do about it. So it's a hard situation. But definitely look it up. The Great Pacific garbage patch, about 2 weeks ago, I think there was a big news story about cleaning it up.
That's so interesting. And I do like the idea of different products coming from different countries, and we're cleaning up one another's.
Yeah, it's just a whole
tracking it.
Yeah, and they I don't know if you've heard of the One Ocean, I think it is, or One Less campaign, where they put radio trackers on 7 plastic bottles and set them off the coast of Cornwall, and there's a tracking page you can watch to see where they all end up.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I think it's called One Less Bottle in the Ocean.
One Less Bottle. We'll have to look it up later as well.
Yeah,
I think that's so interesting. I'm going to.
You can watch where it's all going, yeah.
It's just amazing. We have time for one more question before we wrap up. And that question is, what are your hopes for COP26? It's a big question. It's a very big question.
That's a biggie, isn't it? Oh, man. First of all, I'm really pleased that it's coming to Scotland, to Glasgow. I think that's great. And I think that gives us a huge opportunity to put Scottish voices on the map. My hopes really are that it's not surface level chat that we have there, and all the world leaders get together and we don't just talk about the issues in a sort of a surface level way that's not meaningful, and that it's not just a chance to be seen to be doing something. I hope this time, with all the evidence that we have, with all that we know, that the pennies really dropped and that people come together at COP this year for genuine change, and they work collaboratively, and voices, like I'm saying, Scottish voices, but also voices of like grassroots campaigns and small organisations and schools and pupils, and the youth climate strike voices are heard, because this is what we really need, and this is the biggest opportunity that we have. So I really just hope that it's productive and we don't turn around in 2 years and say, oh, remember we talked about that got brought up at COP and nothing's been done about it. So I guess my hope is that it's truly impactful, but that it also shines a light on Scotland and we get a chance to talk about a lot of the good work that goes on here as well. So hopefully some of you will be going to COP and you'll enjoy it, and you'll get a real highlight into that.
I think that is the most perfect way to sum up and wrap up this session, is that for it to be impactful and for everyone's voices to be heard. Thank you so much, Kirsty, for joining us today for this session. I have learnt so much, and I'm going to spend the rest of my day Googling all sorts of things. But thank you so much for joining us, and to all of the schools and audiences that have watched either in Scotland or in the UK or even further afar. If you do have any questions, you will have noticed that Kirsty has popped her email, but you can always send them through to us as well. We have a number of other sessions that are happening today, so please stay tuned and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Bye.